It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. The zombie outbreak in Michigan by Augustus Cordova. The broadcast didn't even sound like news at first. Slipped in between chatter about gas prices climbing, another dry spell rolling in, the kind of Philistations throw at you when they don't have anything real to say. The anchor's voice was flat, bored, even as he mentioned isolated disturbances in a few nearby counties. No urgency, no edge. But the wording made me freeze where I was. I was in the backyard, crouched low by the gate, gloves black with oil, trying to fix a hinge that wouldn't hold. The air was sharp with late-day chill, and a gust kicked dry leaves skittering across the grass. I straightened up slow, wiped my hands on my jeans, and listened through the open kitchen window as the radio droned on. "Authorities are monitoring the situation," the announcer said. "Residents should remain calm and avoid speculation." Well, that was it. That was all I needed. I'd heard that sanitized before. The careful language they use when the truth's too ugly to say out loud. It meant something had already gone bad. And if I sat around waiting for the official story, I'd already be dead too. I went inside, killed the radio, went straight for the sink. Some people would have kept listening, hoping for scraps of detail, but not me. I'd learned long ago not to trust that water would always pour when you twisted the tap. One blackout, one contamination alert, and suddenly people are clawing each other in grocery aisles, fighting over plastic bottles or drinking from gutters. Yeah, I'd seen it before. Panic moves fast, shelves empty faster, so I didn't wait. I started filling everything I could get my hands on. Last jars, empty milk jugs, 5-gallon buckets, the busted camping cooler I hadn't touched in years. I filled them till they sloshed. By the time the pressure dropped in the pipes, the counters and floor were covered in dripping lids and stacked containers. Then I opened the gun safe. Rifles, pistols, carbines, steel laid out across the dining table like old friends. My hands fed rounds into magazines on autopilot, a rhythm etched from years at the range. I racked shotguns and stashed them where they'd count. One behind the bedroom door, one in the hallway closet, another in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the sound of shells sliding into place. Normally I kept everything locked down tight, but tonight the safes weren't protection. They were dead weight. I wasn't panicking. This was muscle memory. My name's Ethan, and I already knew this wasn't the kind of storm you'd dried out in a day or two. Well, I'd been ready for years, not because I thought the world was doomed, but because life had shown me how fast it can gut you. My old man died on a construction site when I was a kid, crushed under scaffolding because some company figured safety checks cost too much. The lawsuit dragged on forever, but in the end, nobody paid. Nobody ever does. Mom didn't last much longer. She drowned herself one bottle at a time until there was nothing left of her but slurred words and empty glasses. After that, it was my grandmother, cancer, eating her alive. Carried her to every appointment, followed every instruction like gospel, and one mistake. Wrong dose, bad order, maybe just a pharmacist in a hurry. She was gone in weeks. That's when it burned into me. Nobody's coming. Not the government, not the courts, not the doctors. When it mattered most, every system would fail. I swear I'd never let my life hang in someone else's hands again. By the time night fell, my house didn't look like a home, looked like a bunker. Machetes and katanas leaning against walls, firearms staged. I sat at the kitchen table with a lantern burning low, listening to the far-off thrum of helicopters cutting across the sky. The news anchors were still pairing the same line. Stay calm, stay home. Easy words when you're safe behind glass and cameras. I slept light in the living room, rifle by my side. When morning dragged itself in, the wail of distant sirens tore me awake. I climbed into the attic, brushed dust off the window, and peered down Main Street. Military trucks lined the road like a blockade. Soldiers shouting orders, coring neighbors into groups and marching them toward buses parked to the school. Loudspeakers cracked over the rooftops with a single command: evacuate now. I watched in the dark as my neighbors, fouled out of their homes, bags slung across their backs, kids clutching at their parents like lifelines. I didn't move. I knew what those safe zones really were. Gymnasiums crammed with bodies, food gone in days, sickness spreading like wildfire. I've been locked in one of those camps was worse than staying here alone. I climbed down and spent the morning barricading. Extra braces across the doors, boards hammered over the windows, burning through every scrap of lumber I had left in the shed. Each nail I drove home was a little more time bored if someone or something came looking to get inside. By afternoon, the street was dead. No cars, no voices, not even the hum of engines on the highway. Just silence. Too much silence. The kind that presses on your skull until you notice how loud your heartbeat is. I cracked a can of soup, heated it on the camping stove, and sat at the counter with the steam rising in the dark kitchen. I called Lucas, picked up on the third ring, his voice trembling, told me to get to the city, said the guard had quarantined zones set up there, swore it was safer. I told him no, I had food, I had water, I had weapons and walls. I wasn't trading all that for a tent under barbed wire. I told him if things went to hell, he, his wife and their boy could come here instead. He didn't like it, but I hung up before the argument started. That night the gunfire came, distant at first, just faint cracks carried on the wind over the hills. But the rhythm of it kept building, bursts rolling one after the other. Then the screams, short, sharp, gone as quick as they came. The silence that followed was worse, though. I killed every light, sat in the corner of the living room with my rifle across my knees and waited. The house was black and heavy, every creak of the wood sounding like footsteps. Then I heard it, the scrape of movement in the yard. I stood the back door open, low and quiet, and crept toward the shed. The motion light snapped on, flooding the grass in cold white. A dog, skin and bones, fur patchy, ribbed sharp against its sides. It froze in the glare for a heartbeat and then bolted into the trees. I shut the door behind me and went back inside. The rifle never left my hands, not even when sleep finally caught me. By the third morning, I knew I had to move. Supplies weren't going to restock themselves, and I needed eyes on how bad things had really gotten. I strapped on a chest rig, slung the rifle over my shoulder, and stepped into the dead street. Oh, Main Street was a graveyard. Cars sat crooked, doors hanging open, left behind like their drivers had been ripped out mid-motion. Barricades by the school were torn to splinters, sandbags scattered, proof the soldiers had tried and failed to hurt the panic. I stuck to the alleys, cutting through shadows until I reached the hardware store. Windows smashed, glass crunching, but I still pulled nails, screws, and a roll of chain link from the wreckage. They went in the pack along with a pair of bolt cutters ripped off the wall, and the pharmacy was worse. Shelves gutted, only scraps left behind. But I dug deeper and scored a few bottles of painkillers and antibiotics hidden behind a busted rack. I didn't linger. Being caught inside an open building was a death sentence. Then back on the street, I froze. He was there, staggering at the far end of the block, clothes shredded, skin bleached and veined, dark like rot, spreading over the glass. He went down hard on the pavement and then he stood up again. I slipped into an alley, rifle leveled, and his head turned toward me. The eyes were not eyes anymore, just a cloudy film, dead and blind, but locked on me all the same. He launched forward faster than his broken body had any right to move. I fired once, and the crack tore through the street, echoed off the walls, and he dropped like a dead weight. I didn't wait to see if he stayed down. Oh, I ran low, fast, weaving through alleys until I hit the edge of town, slammed the door shut behind me, through the lock, and dragged a dresser across it before I let myself breathe. The rest of the day went to hardening the perimeter, double-wired the trip lines, hung tin cans on fishing line to catch even the smallest movement, took stock of my supplies, reorganized the bunker so I could reach what mattered fast. By the time I finally sat down, the house felt like a fortress, but it didn't feel safe. Not with the memory of that knocking from the night before creeping back into my head. Whoever had tried the door hadn't returned, but I knew damn well they hadn't just walked away either. There were still people out there, drifting, scared, hungry. That made them dangerous. Desperation rots the mind fast, and desperate people can be trusted. The radio snapped to life that evening, cutting through the silence with a burst of static. A voice bled through, low and urgent. Attention residents of Greene County and surrounding areas. Mandatory curfew is in effect from sunset to sunrise. Comply with evacuation orders. Designated safe zones are at full capacity and will continue to process arrivals for as long as possible. The message repeated twice, then vanished into dead air. I shut the radio off. I knew what safe zones meant. Buses hauling families into gymnasiums, CS stacked in rows, soldiers with rifles deciding who stayed behind the fences and who didn't. Supplies run dry, and then it turns into survival of the meanest. I'd read enough disaster reports to know how quickly order breaks down. So I made my rounds, every lock checked, shutters bolted, weapons loaded and staged when my hands could find them in seconds. No safes, no delays. If someone came crashing through, I'd be ready before they cleared the doorway. Darkness was settling when my phone lit up. It was Lucas. For a second, I thought about letting it buzz out, but I answered. No small talk. His voice came fast, urgent. He'd seen footage from the city. Crowds tearing at barricades, soldiers beating them back. The guard was walling off quarantine centers. Anyone outside after curfew was either dragged away or dropped where they stood. He begged me to come to hold up with him and his family where there was protection. I told him no flat. Silence pressed through the line. Then the accusations were being stubborn, paranoid, reckless. I told him the truth. Stepping into one of those zones meant handing over control to the same machine that had failed us over and over, and there was no guarantee I'd even make it inside before the walls sealed shut. I said what I said before. If it got bad, he needed to bring his family here. He didn't want to hear it, but I killed the call before it turned into a fight. That night, the world out anymore, and explosions, deep rolling blasts that rattled the glass in their frames. Smoke plumes clawed at the horizon. I lay on the couch, rifle across my lap, every muscle wired tight, ears straining against the quiet between the echoes. Once I thought I heard voices whispering close to the house, crept to the window, hard punching at my ribs. It was only the wind curling through the trees. Sleep never really came. Morning broke with another grim voice crackling over the emergency broadcast. Evacuation centers were at the edge of capacity. Any stragglers were ordered to report to the county school by 3 p.m. for transport. He announced. His tone was brittle, clipped, like he didn't buy the words he was reading any more than I did. I killed the radio and went back to work. Next 12 hours blurred into sweat and silence. I braced the doors with thick planks bolted into the studs, stacking layer after layer until the frames groaned under their own weight. Out back, I ripped old fence posts from the shed and drove them into the dirt at jagged angles, a makeshift barrier for anything stupid enough to charge straight in. Fishing lines stretched tight across choke points, tin cans stuffed with pebbles dangling low. Trip an alarm and I'd know before they hit the walls. I wasn't building a fortress, that was impossible. What I needed was warning. Seconds bored in advance with the difference between survival and getting torn apart. By evening, I ducked into the bunker. The layout was tight and suffocating, but every inch had its purpose. I dragged the heavier ammo crates deeper inside, stacked the canned food in rows by expiration date, checked the water barrels for leaks. Freeze-dried meats. I pulled closer to the hatch, easy to grab if I had to move fast. I sat on the cot, breathing in the stale air, listening. Even underground, I could swear I could hear it. A low hum of distant engines. The city groaning under its own claps. When I came back topside, the sun was bleeding out behind the tree line. I sealed the blackout curtains, cut the lone lamp, and let the house sink into black. Outside, the silence was heavier than the night before. I ate fast, nothing more than fuel, then planted myself by the front door, rifle propped against my shoulder, eyes fixed on the barricades. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the nog from nights ago. If it had been someone desperate, would they come back? Or was it only a matter of time before something worse found its way here first? Bar 2. Day 5 kicked off with the thrum of rotors. I dragged myself up to the attic window and caught sight of 2 birds slicing low across the rooftops, gear dangling beneath them like carcasses on hooks. They didn't scout, didn't hover, just cut straight across the sky and vanished beyond the hills. I climbed down and tried Lucas again. Dead air, nothing but silence. The hours bled together after that, tightening the wire, checking the kill zones, making sure nothing had slipped loose in the night. I wore myself ragged because stopping meant thinking, and thinking dragged me places I couldn't afford to go. Every snap of a branch outside had me on edge. Once I spotted some bastard crouched low in a yard 2 houses over, moving quick, rat-like. He didn't come closer, or I didn't call out, just watched until he melted around the corner. By dusk, my nerves were coiled. No way I was letting the stink of hot food drift into the dark. Ate cold out of a can, hunched at the kitchen table with a lantern dialed so low it barely cut the gloom. Just past midnight, the cans on the north wire clattered. I froze, didn't move a muscle. At first, it could have been the wind, metallic chime blending with the hiss of branches. But then it came again, sharper, deliberate, someone brushing the line. My fingers tightened around the rifle as I crawled toward the window. The yard was drowned in pale moonlight, clouds dragging shadows across the grass, the fence cutting jagged lines into the night, and at first there was nothing. It was empty, but I knew the wire had been touched. I cracked the window and slid the barrel through. My own breathing felt like a roar, so I strangled it down and listened. Far off, a dog barked once, low, sharp, and cut off mid-notes. Then came a faint scrape of weight, shifting on dry leaves beyond the fence. I tracked the sound, crosshairs sweeping the tree-line, but the shape never showed itself. Well, the minutes stretched and the noises died out. Just the hum of insects and the restless whisper of wind remained. I stayed wired through the night, nerves stretched thin, circling the perimeter twice before the horizon even hinted at dawn. Whatever rattled the cans didn't come back, but I wasn't stupid enough to think I was alone. Morning dragged in with the chop of rotors again, low and heavy. I climbed the attic ladder, pressed my face against the grime cake glass, and caught sight of 2 National Guard birds carving circles above the town. On the ground, convoys had locked down the intersections. Troops herded people toward makeshift checkpoints. Loudspeakers spat orders, reported the buses at the school. I stayed swallowed in shadow watching. Families stumbled through the streets, bags over their shoulders, kids clinging like anchors. Relief showed on some faces, raw fear on others. Soldiers threaded between them, pushing order where chaos wanted to break loose. The buses swallowed them whole in waves, each one heavier with bodies than the last. Across the street, an old neighbor of mine stood stiff on his porch, ignoring the shouts from below. After a while, he caved in, though dragging a scuffed suitcase, stepping into line like a man walking to his own execution. By afternoon, silence had reclaimed the street. The engines faded into memory, leaving only me in the emptiness. I leaned back against the attic wall, breathing in dust, wondering if I safety. Maybe not, didn't matter. I remember my grandmother wasting away in that hospital bed. Nobody came for her, my father crushed under steel and scaffolding. Nobody saved him, nobody was coming for me. When evening crept in, I already knew my next move. Supplies don't last forever. With the town bled out, I had a window before scavengers or the infected cleaned it to the bones. So I packed my gear, slung the rifle, and stepped into the street. As night smothered the rooftops, silence pressed in hard. No engines, no voices, no heartbeat of light. I cut through alleys, hugging shadows, checking corners, ears hunting for the faintest wrong sound. My first stop, the gas station on Main. The front was locked, but the side window hung in shards. I slid through, boots crunching on glass, dropping behind the counter. Gels were stripped bare, but I scraped together a few bottles of engine oil, lighter fluid, and a half-dead box of snack bars. In the back, I cracked open the register. Nothing but wrinkled bills, worthless now, but I pocketed them anyway. Next stop was the hardware store. Didn't bother with the front entrance, too exposed. Bolt cutters made short work of the lock on the loading dock, and I slipped inside. The place smelled of rust and dust, but I moved fast, stripping shelves for screws, nails, spools of wire, padlocks, lengths of chain. Everything went into the back, neat and tidy. Only what I could carry, though. Only what I'd need. Pharmacy was worse, riskier. Windows had been smashed out, glass glittering across the pavement like a warning. I dropped low and scanned the inside. Darkness swallowed most of it, the only light bleeding in from the street. Nothing moved, at least nothing I could see, so I slid through the broken frame and kept low. Shelves had been gutted, but I clawed up a few bottles of antiseptic and antibiotic. Ikes hidden behind makeup displays. They disappeared into my bag, and then I froze. Sound soft cloth against steel. Then a groan, low and hollow, crawling up my spine. I hit the floor behind the counter, rifled tight against my shoulder. A noise grew closer. A figure lurched out of the shadows, head tilted at a wrong broken angle. Its steps were jerky, stuttering, but it carried speed, the kind that could close the gap if it caught the scent of me. Didn't move, didn't even breathe. Twitched toward another noise deeper inside and then staggered off. Its shuffling, fading into the dark. I slid out through the glass the way I came, silent, as I could manage. Made it back to the house clean, but the picture of that thing had stayed burned in my head. The way it moved, the way it snapped its head when my boot crunched glass. It wasn't blind, sound ruled them. Sound could be turned into a weapon. Day 8 opened with more scavenging, places I'd avoided when the street still had traffic. The auto parts store coughed up tools and a jug of stabilizer. A hunting shop gave me ammunition and thick gloves. I stared clear of the grocery stores. Too obvious, too many desperate eyes still chasing crumbs. But every trip cut deeper into danger. The infected were thicker now, drifting in pairs, sometimes alone. Their paths were never straight, just wandering, stopping like they were listening. I learned to wait them out, to stay in shadow. The back alley to a strip of shops, I found one crouched over a carcass. A dog, its shoulders hiked and flexed as it ripped strips of meat from the bones, wet tearing echoing in the silence. I backed away slowly, finger locked on the trigger, but it never looked up. I got home heavy with supplies and something better. Knowledge, yeah. Sound pulled them like a hook through water, and once they had it, they didn't let it go easy. That night I wired more traps around the property, laying distractions to pull them off toward the far edge if they got too close. By the 9th day, the town was a corpse picked clean. Grass split the black top-like veins, and the wind dragged scraps of paper and trash through streets that used to breathe. I spent the morning staring from the attic window, watching the rot spread. The infected were showing up more and more now. Spotted 3 of them drifting down Main, moving like wolves that didn't remember how to hunt, sniffing, pausing, heads twitching. That was it for me. No more trips into town unless I was desperate. Supplies would last, risk wouldn't. That night I killed the lights early and sat in the dark by the front door, listening. The neighborhood had grown a new kind of silence by then, stretched thin and mean. Somewhere close, one of them let out a low groan, followed by the sharp clatter of one of my tripwires. I froze. Didn't move a muscle for nearly an hour. Just stared at the boarded windows, waiting for something to try and break through. Nothing came. Whatever had tripped the lion wandered off, but the scrape of its feet stuck in my skull long after. That was the moment I knew waiting wasn't going to save me. Time to turn this place into a proper fortress. Dawn came. I was already moving. I worked the yard slowly, mapping it all out in my head. Every blind spot, every funnel point, anywhere I could, steer them into open ground where the rifle would speak. I sketched rough diagrams in a battered notebook, marking sight lines from the upstairs windows, pacing out distances I could cover with lead. The fishing line went. It was too soft. I swapped it for steel wire, threading it through the yard like veins of a trap. I tied on old wrenches, rusted sheet metal, propane canisters, anything that would scream when touched. I wanted sound. Sound meant I'd know where they were. Sound meant they'd step into the kill zone. Next came the barricades. Drove fence posts into the dirt at angles, weaving rusted chain link between them like razor teeth. The weak spots along the perimeter I patched with whatever I had. Splintered planks, warped plywood, anything that could take a nail. I hammered until my arm shook, sweat cutting through the dirt on my skin. By the time the sun dropped again, the house was no longer just a hiding place. It was a snare. By mid-afternoon, I turned the yard into a total kill zone. Any breach past the outer barricades funneled intruders into tight corridors, could sweep from the upstairs windows with overlapping fire. Well, I wasn't fooling myself. If a crew with tools or real fire came knocking, they'd punch through eventually, but they'd bleed time, and that was enough. Against the infected, though, the minus bastards who only knew how to smash and lunge, the choke points might hold a little longer. At night, I made another circuit, checked the traps, reset lines where they'd sagged. The quiet pressed in heavier than ever now. The distant crack of rifles I'd heard that first week gone. No more thrum of helicopters, no sirens, just the whisper of wind through the trees, broken now and then by a low, gut-churning moan that drifted in with it. Day 11 of the motion sensors when I caught it, though. Footsteps in the gravel. Not the dragging scrape of the infected. These were human-controlled. I stood low behind the fence, rifle leveled, breath caged in my chest, and the steps halted, and a voice tore through the stillness. Hello, horse ragged at the edges. Please, is anyone there? I stayed stone still, finger brushing the trigger guard. Please, the voice begged again and closer this time. I got nowhere else to go. I'm not sick. I just need food, just for tonight. Through the gaps in the fence, I caught sight of him. A thin man, maybe late 20s, early 30s, clothes in tatters. something clenched tight in his fist that I couldn't make out. His eyes flicked across the yard like a hunted animal, twitching at shadows. My gut screamed, "Don't move. If I let him in, he could be a threat. He could be infected and hiding it. He could mark the place, bring others later." But as he stood there, bent beneath some invisible weight, couldn't shake the ghosts of all the voices I had ignored these last few weeks. Voices that had cried out for help and died unheard. Oh, my pulse hammered. My instincts clawed at me to stay silent, and still I forced myself to move. I dropped the muzzle toward the dirt a few feet from his boots and squeezed the trigger. The blast cracked through the empty street like thunder. He flinched hard, whatever he was clutching clattering to the ground. His eyes darted toward the fence and found nothing. Then he bolted. Within seconds, he was swallowed by the tree line. I held my aim a full minute longer just in case before lowering the rifle. My hand shook as I bent down, plucked the hot casing from the ground, and slid it into my pocket like evidence. All of that day, he haunted me. Thin, wasted, probably unarmed. Maybe that warning shot sealed his fate. Maybe he'd starve. Maybe he'd stumble into someone less cautious, someone who'd actually help. Or maybe the woods would eat him alive before morning. God, I hated knowing that I'd never find out. That night, I doubled the watch. Every shadow made me twitch. Half expected him to return, maybe dragging a pack behind him, but no one came. The silence grew heavier, pressing on the house like a heavy weight. Driving him off had just proven what I already knew, but didn't want to say out loud. I couldn't trust a soul out there. Day 12 bled in with new trouble. I woke to the sound of something creeping along the outer fence, dragging itself slowly. I slid to the window, careful not to rattle the glass, and finally saw one of them up close. Infected, plain as day, standing across the street, its head cocked like it was listening, skin pale and drawn tight like old leather, scraps of hair peeling away in clumps. Every few seconds it spasmed, shifting its weight, never quite still. I froze behind the curtain, my lungs locked. The minutes dragged, then it let out a groan, deep and rotten, and spun in a slow circle like he was sniffing for prey it couldn't quite locate. A tin can trip lion whispered in the wind, and its head snapped toward the sound like a whip. Shuffled forward a few steps, then stopped, waiting, watching. And I stayed there nearly an hour, sweat soaking through my shirt until it finally drifted down the road and melted into the distance. That image stuck in my skull all day. These things weren't like animals that spooked and wandered off. No, once something hooked their attention, they locked on. That meant if one ever crossed into my yard, it might stay there for hours, maybe days, until something stronger dragged it away. Well, that particular truth rewired me completely. From that moment on, nothing outside these walls felt survivable. Spent the afternoon resetting my snares, dragging them further from the house so the sound wouldn't lead the infected straight to my door. I wired the outer yard with noisemakers, diversions meant to pull them off. I felt safer, but not safe. The window for mistakes was closing. The infected were creeping in, mapping the bones of the town, sniffing out the hollow spaces left behind when everyone had run. Sooner or later, one of them would blunder into my traps and test the line. Dawn broke on the 13th day, and I already knew I needed structure. Sitting still when waiting was poison. It made fear louder, made my hands unsteady. I forced myself into a rhythm. Up with a light, choke down a plain meal and walk the perimeter. Every trap, every barricade, every stretch of fence got checked, logged into a battered notebook. I wrote down shifts in the dirt, footprints in the mud, broken wires that needed fixing. Then came the runs into town. I didn't linger, and I never went near the obvious spots. Grocery store, the big chain outlets. Those had long been picked clean or worse. Instead, I hunted the forgotten places. Sheds behind shuttered shops, half-abandoned gas stations, hollow houses left in a rush. Kept low, hugging corners, cutting through alleys, never trusting the open streets. Luck finally broke my way behind an old repair shop. I found a spool of industrial cable still wrapped in plastic, heavy enough to strengthen every snare I had. I dragged it back through side yards and empty lots, keeping my head down. Scored a couple of flashlights too, plus a case of fresh batteries. That night, I stashed them in the bunker and scratched them onto my supply list with a grim sort of pride. The bunker was the only thing keeping me steady, my anchor in a world gone rotten. Part 3. Every night when the sun bled out and the streets turned lethal, I shut myself into that suffocating little room, hunched on the cot with the lantern whispering light. I read all survival handbooks, field guides, anything I'd stockpiled over the years. I come for tricks I might have missed. See, raps of knowledge I'd forgotten, kept the gears in my head turning, and reminded me why I'd wasted years preparing for a nightmare I once prayed would never come. Day 14 shoved me closer to the infected than I'd been since it all began. I'd been testing a new cable, rigging snares along the far edge of the yard, hoping for stray animals, bait, maybe food. Midday, the lions screamed and the cans clattered like gunfire. Rifle in hand, I crept low through the brush. What I found made me freeze. One of them, an infected, snared in the steel. I thrashed like a rabid dog, twisting, clawing at the air. Not fresh. Its skin had gone grey, peeling off in sheets. Its clothes were stiff with dirt and blood. But it was strong. Every jerk tightened the cable, slicing deeper into its flesh, but it never flinched. No scream, no groan, just blind hunger. I crouched in the shadows of a tree and watched. Minutes bled into hours. The sun slid lower. Shadows stretched. It still never stopped. The steel bit into its muscle, tore it raw. But the thing never faltered, snapped his teeth at me, reaching, straining as if pain didn't exist. Over the time night swallowed the yard, I knew the truth. Once these things were fixed on you, they never broke off. No fatigue, no pain, no retreat. When I couldn't see anymore, I raised the rifle and put a single round through its skull. The body dropped limp, and I cut the cable loose, dug a shallow pit near the edge of the property, rolled it in, and marked the grave with a stone. But its frenzy stayed with me in the memory of that endless struggle, gnawing at me all the way back to the house. That night, I wrote down the lesson in my journal. They don't get tired, they don't feel pain, and they don't stop unless you give them something else to chase. And that knowledge would shape everything that came after. By day 15, I stopped thinking about getting through the next hour and started thinking about how the hell I could outlast this thing for however long it dragged on. If rescue was coming, it would have come already. Food and water to limp through a few more weeks, but after that I'd need to grow something, hunt something, or start tearing the world apart for scraps. That morning I ripped planks from the shed and nailed them across the windows, heavy braces that would hold against a hard push. Built shutters too, rigged so I could snap them open from inside and shoot out if I had to. Upstairs I jammed together a barricade in the hallway, something I could slam into place in seconds if they got through the ground floor. By noon I was in the yard digging. Small pits lined the fence like graves. I filled them with kindling, set up scrap metal covers, fire traps, smoke traps, distractions for when things got bad enough. Marked everything downwind of the house controlled and ready. When my hands weren't working, my head was. I drew maps of the house and yard, making choke points, kill zones, lines of fire. Wrote lists, more nails, more tools, anything sharp, anything heavy. That night, I sat in the bunker and realized the only thing holding me together was this routine. Wake up, check the perimeter, maybe scavenge if it felt safe, fix the traps, read at night to quiet the noise in my head, a rhythm in a dead world. But I knew it was only borrowed time. Day 16 opened with the sound that made my stomach churn. The fare-off chop of rotor blades, low, heavy. They came before I could even see them, before they even broke the horizon. I crawled into the attic and pressed my face to the glass. 2 black dots streaked across the sky. Military transports. Heavy birds flying fast and low. No patrol, no rescue, just passing by. Then the first explosion cracked the hills. A deep rolling thunder that told me exactly how bad things had gotten. Blast was distant, but it still rattled the attic glass like a warning. I stayed put for nearly an hour, ice fixed on the horizon as thin. Trails of smoke clawed into the sky. Some were small, the kind you expect from houses catching fire, but others were monsters. Huge black plumes, the kind you only see when whole fuel depots or city blocks go up in flames. I'd known for days that collapse was accelerating, but watching it unravel in real time twisted that vague dread into a blade point. Whatever command structure had been left was pulling back, abandoning ground, maybe whole districts. The thought made me run the perimeter again. Spent most of the day on my belly in the dirt, checking every trip line and barricade. That's when I noticed the details that didn't sit right. Tripwire was loose, not the way I'd set it. Stretch of fencing bent inward like someone had leaned hard against it. I froze there, staring at the earth until I caught the faint outline of a boot print pressed into soft soil. Not the infected, no, something human. Someone had tested my defenses, skin crawled cold, every head standing on end. Spent the rest of the daylight shoring up weak spots, stacking second lines of traps closer to the house, shifting barricades so I could sweep them from the upstairs windows. I carved crawl tunnels under the shed to the bunker, camouflaging the exits with plywood and rotted leaves. If the house got breached, I'd need a back door. That night, I didn't sleep, which sat in the corner of the darkened living room with a rifle across my lap, replaying scenarios over and over. Whoever had prowled the perimeter hadn't forced entry, not yet. But the idea of eyes on me, unseen, dug into my brain like barbed wire. The 17th day was the quietest yet. No distant choppers, no rumbling detonations, not even the guttural moans of the infected rolling through the night air. The silence wasn't peace, though. It was wrong, like the whole world was holding its breath for something. I paced the house room by room, checking every gun, repositioning blades, machetes, katanas, leaned against door frames. I kept a pack half-stocked and left it. I wouldn't waste seconds doing so. By afternoon, the isolation had its claws in me. Every groan of a floorboard had me snapping my head around. Checked the basement doors 3 times in under an hour. Once I swore I heard footsteps in the yard. I crept up to the attic window, heart hammering. But the yard was empty. That night, I barely touched food. Just sat in the bunker, staring at shelves, counting cans, measuring how long I could stretch what was left. Another month, maybe, if I didn't risk town, that is. Day 18 kicked off like all the others, quiet, routine, deadly, dull. I was working the trap lines by the yard when a sound cut through the wind. An engine. My stomach dropped. Nobody drove anymore. Fuel was nearly gone and the infected didn't touch vehicles. I dropped low by the fence, my ears straining. West. It was coming from the west. Coughing sputter of a motor on its last legs. Minutes dragged on before I saw it. A beaten-up SUV crawling down the old county road. Tires chewing gravel like bones. I knew it on sight. It was Lucas's. Mike broke into a sprint, reaching the gate as the thing rolled to a stop, the engine dying with a rattling choke. He climbed out, gaunt and hollow-eyed, scanning the horizon like death itself was trailing him. Anna came next, clutching Dale tight against her hip. The kid looked more ghost than boy, skin pale, eyes half closed, too weak to cry. All three of them wore the same uniform, dirt, sweat, and shredded clothes. "We barely made it," Lucas rasped. His voice was sandpaper. "Quarantine zone's gone. Breached 2 nights ago. We just ran, drove till the tank gave out. I yanked the gate wider, waved them in fast, I sweeping the road like a sniper's. Only when the chain clanged shut behind them did my chest loosen just a notch. Inside I cleared a patch of floor for them while my nerves burned through me. I checked the perimeter again. Nothing moved out there, but I didn't trust the silence, and my head was already crunching numbers. 3 more mouths, 3 more targets to guard. When I came back in, Dale was out cold on the blanket I'd thrown down, his mum trying to get water past his cracked lips. Lucas sat hunched over, his hands buried in his face, like the weight of the last 72 hours had finally dropped now that he wasn't running for the moment. We didn't say much that night, they were wrecked, and I was too busy tearing holes in my own routines inside my head. Supplies wouldn't last, defenses would have to be doubled. Everything had just shifted, and survival was about to get a whole lot harder. Day 19 broke with a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Movement inside the house. The floorboards let out a tire groan as Anna crept down the hallway, careful not to stir her kid. Lucas was already up, hunched at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of water clutched in his hands, eyes hollow, staring like he'd burned out the last of his thoughts, somewhere on the road. His knuckles were torn raw, reminder of how long he'd strangled that steering wheel. Breakfast was dead quiet. The boy pushed a chunk of stale bread around his plate and barely took a bite. I couldn't stop counting the jars and cans we'd cracked open. Every scrap we'd swallowed felt like another mark on a debt we'd never pay off. Once we'd eaten, I laid it out plain, maybe 3 weeks of supplies left. And only if we rationed like monks. No waste, no exceptions, nobody touched the bunker stockpile without my say-so. Lucas didn't like that, bristled at the idea of me calling the shots. Said one man shouldn't hold all the power. I reminded him it wasn't him who'd been holding this place together, laying traps, shoring up walls and keeping the bastards outside from tearing through to us. Well, my rules were the only reason we were still breathing. The silence after that was heavy, but eventually he gave a short nod. We spent the day hardening the perimeter, so more hands made the work. Lucas didn't know the first thing about barricades or pressure traps. His wife tried to help, but half her focus was on the boy, too young to understand why the yard was off limits. I showed Lucas where the wires went, how the noise traps would drag the infected away from the walls if they triggered. He got restless quick, always rushing, and as a result, my patience wore thin. By afternoon, we'd thickened the outer fence with chain link and busted planks, carving choke points I could cover from upstairs. Trenches dug shallow near the gates, lined with broom handle stakes. Anyone rushing us would bleed for it. When the sweat finally dried, we sat in the shed's shadow, drinking warm water that tasted like rust. Lucas asked what I planned to do when the food ran dry. Told him the truth, I hadn't decided. Hunting was suicide with the infected this close. Scavenging was slim pickings and town was almost stripped bare. He suggested raiding farms, open fields though no cover. I didn't like it, but didn't shut the door on the thought. That night the house felt smaller, suffocating, while Dale whimpered in his sleep while Anna whispered him calm. Lucas shifted and twisted on the floor, always restless. I lay awake, listening to 3 different sets of lungs pulling air in the dark. I realized something I hadn't before. Solitude hadn't been the real danger. This was day 20, started with another sweep around the perimeter. Having my brother along slowed me down, but he had to learn. I walked him through the weak spots, places I'd found tampered snares, snap branches, prints where no one should have been. We patched them with extra wire, rattling cans strung up as warnings. He kept asking about the infected, said he'd seen them swarming in the quarantine zone, said their numbers were climbing fast. He told me how soldiers had tried to hold the line, only to watch the fences crumble under a tide of flesh. I kept quiet about the one I'd snared, the one I'd watched thrash and claw for hours without tiring. He didn't need that truth. After we ate, we turned to the house, reinforced the upstairs windows with more planks. I ripped a door frame out of the garage, bolted it across the back door with scrap metal until it looked like a tomb. Lucas helped, but it was always an argument. He pushed for speed, I demanded precision. By nightfall, we settled on shifts. He'd watch first, I'd take second. Anna stayed holed up in the bedroom with Dale, who barely spoke anymore. Day 21 is when the seams started tearing. We moved deeper past the fence, stretching out a second line of traps through the trees. Extra distance meant extra warning. The work was brutal, and Lucas's temper boiled over. He snapped that I was obsessed with hiding lines no one would notice, wasting time while food was running thin. I snapped back, told him one slip meant all of us dead. The fight fizzled out quickly, but the sting stayed. Anna wouldn't meet my eyes, and even the kid picked up on the silence. That night, rifle across my knees, I kept watch at the front window. Thought about how much heavier everything had become since I'd let them in. I didn't regret it, but the math was merciless. More mouths, more thirst, more strain on the walls. And the affected out there didn't care about our cracks. They'd come sooner or later. Day 22, and I knew we were out of options. We had to push farther. No way around it. My brother and his wife gave me that look, fear wrapped in silence when I told them that we'd be stripping farms and houses beyond the town line. They didn't like it, but the food was almost gone. Rationing tighter wouldn't save us. Hunger doesn't bargain. We needed animals if any had survived, and whatever canned scraps people had missed in the first waves of flight. I told them straight, they needed to start fighting. Lucas gave a stiff nod. Anna froze for a moment, but she knew there was no way around it. I started with the basics. How to hold the guns without shooting yourself in the foot. How to load, clear jams, keep your hands steady instead of flailing like prey. Every mistake burned me raw. Wasn't just clumsy training, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. But by the 23rd day, they could at least put rounds into a target without wasting half the magazine. The next morning, I dragged them out of the trap lines, show them how the noise rigs worked, how the dead falls snapped down with enough force to crush bone, how each choke point was set to bleed the swarm dry. They didn't have my eye for detail, but they were catching on. That afternoon, we shored up the secondary perimeter, more barricades along the fence line, reset the snares that already bagged a few of the things. I drilled them on silence, working without a word. Hand signals only, no slip-ups. By sundown, we stumbled back inside, spent and filthy. But for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. A sliver of belief. Maybe, just maybe, we could hold this ground when the storm came. That night, I sat in the dark by the upstairs window, rifle resting cold against my shoulder. But I caught movement in the tree-line beyond the fence. 4 of them at least, drifting like shadows, their heads snapping at every whisper the wind carried. They didn't twitch, kept the barrel fixed just beyond the fence, waiting, breathing slowly. They hadn't spotted me, but watching them unsettle me more than if they had. One would peel off, staggering toward a rustle in the brush, then lurch back to the others when it came up empty. Not organized, but not mindless either, like predators circling, trying to decide if the kill was worth it. I held my fire. Sir, Hot would sing out like a beacon, and we couldn't afford to bring more down on us. So I watched minutes crawled into hours before they finally slipped back into the woods, swallowed by the dark. I stayed wired, eyes glued to the fence line, until the first smear of daylight broke the horizon. 25th day started with repairs. No breach overnight, but the perimeter was wearing thin. Weeks of strain and wind had bowed sections of the fence inward, stakes rattling loose in the earth. Lucas and I spent the morning tightening wire, jamming whatever rotten planks and scrap we could scavenge into the weak spots. While we worked, I caught my nephew staring from the back porch, quiet to stone, his mother hovering at his side, like she could shield him from a world already ruined. I couldn't help but wonder what this life was carving into him. Fear as the air he breathed, violence as his lullaby. By the time the perimeter was patched, noon had crept up on us. We found signs they'd been close in the night. Branches cracked, leaves scattered near the trap lines. Nothing had tripped. But still, I reset the deadfalls, tightening the triggers so even a careless step would snap the weight loose. No chances, not anymore. That afternoon, I was out fixing one of the noise traps that had buckled, sweat dripping into my eyes as I drove a post back into the dirt. I was mid-swing when a shout cut through the air. My brother upstairs window, arm waving frantically. I dropped the hammer and bolted inside, lungs burning by the time I hit the top of the stairs. He pointed toward the tree-ine, 2 shapes crouched low in the brush, half hidden, but not well enough. Not infected, no, their movements were too controlled. One had binoculars trained on the house, glass glinting when the sun hit, just right. They were watching us, studying. We stayed still, silent, eyes locked on them as they scanned our yard like wolves sniffing for weakness. They didn't move in, but they didn't need to. Their intent was clear. Scouting, blind lead, and spark a war I couldn't finish. But I also wasn't about to let them think they could just sit that close and get away with it. I pushed the rifle barrel through the window frame, lined up the dirt 10 feet in front of them, and squeezed. The crack tore through the air, sharp enough to rattle the walls. Both figures dropped flat, scrambling backward, and then vanished into the trees like smoke. I held position for another half hour, waiting to see if they circled back. Nothing. Well, that night, sleep never came. My nerves wouldn't shut off. Wasn't the infected that had me wired anymore. It was the sight of those 2 watching us from the tree-ine. Proof of what I'd already suspected since the first time my traps were tampered with. Survivors, they knew this place was fortified. They knew it was stocked, and they'd be back. The 26th day blared into one long grind. I pushed Lucas and Anna hard, kept them working even when their arms shook with fatigue. Every weakness left standing was a welcome mat. We braced the front gate with extra barricades, added a crossbar to the back door, and I started mapping fallback options, escape routes. I walked them through the bunker hatches and showed them how to crawl under the shed if the house got overrun. Well, Lucas didn't like it. He thought abandoning the house meant giving up. I told him the truth. Walls fail, plans burn, survival needs layers. By afternoon, the tension was eating at us. Lucas snapped when I corrected the way he wired a trap, and I snapped right back. Anna tried to play peacemaker, but I saw it in her eyes. Same anger, same fatigue. They weren't used to living with pressure sitting on their chest every second of every day. They didn't get that one mistake. One slip was enough to bury all three of us. That night we split the watch again. When my shift came, I hauled myself into the attic with a rifle and kept the treine in my sights. For a long stretch, nothing moved. And then I saw them, different from the pair before, but no less deliberate. At least three of them slipping through the woods like shadows, each step measured to stay quiet. They never closed the distance, just far enough to stay out of reach. Close enough to remind me they were there, testing us, probing, learning. I tracked them with the barrel. Every muscle coiled to fire, but I held off. Instead, I studied their routes, burned their positions into my memory. 20 minutes later, they vanished into the black, leaving me staring into the trees, longing after the forest had swallowed them whole. Day 27 opened with chaos. A noise trap went off at first light, and when I hit the outer fence, 3 infected were already tearing at the wire. I dropped them quick with clean shots, but the crack of gunfire pulled 2 more out of the woods. We cut them down before they reached the barricades, but the fence was shredded. Repairs could not wait. As we patched the wire and reinforced the posts, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The infected weren't hiding anymore, they were becoming bolder. And the other survivors, the ones circling us in the dark, meant isolation wasn't a shield anymore either. This place was holding, but only just. That night, I pulled everyone into the living room and laid it out plain. We couldn't keep stumbling from one crisis to the next. We needed a plan to lock this place down for the long haul, or sooner or later we'd be losing it. Nobody argued. They didn't need to. The fear in their eyes said everything. Anna clutched Dale while he slept, her arms wrapped around him like she already saw the worst coming. Lucas asked what kind of plan I meant. Dot him the truth. I didn't know yet. All I knew was the walls wouldn't hold forever and the traps wouldn't save us when they failed. The 28th day slid by without a single incident. No infected, no noises in the woods, just silence, and that silence was worse. For weeks, distant screams, and now nothing. Too quiet. Lucas and I walked the perimeter again, checked every trap, tightened every weak board, while Anna kept Dale busy inside. Everything looked solid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Eyes on us, always. That night, I kept the watch longer than I should have. Eyes burning, nerves raw. Dark outside felt oh so wrong, like the forest beyond the fence was holding its breath, waiting for an attack. Just past midnight, they appeared, shapes sliding along the treine. At first, I thought it was the scouts again, those survivors who'd been circling us. But no, their movements were off, staggering, heads twitching at every noise. A dozen of them at least. The infected. I slipped down from the attic and shook my brother awake. His eyes went wide when I whispered what I'd seen. No time to argue. We woke Anna, grabbed what weapons we had, and braced ourselves. First trap snapped with a crash, and suddenly the whole night was alive with shrieks and pounding bodies. The horde threw itself at the fence, claws raking at the barricades. We moved from window to window, firing slowly, measured, saving every bullet we could. My brother's hands trembled working the bolt, but he didn't stop. And I held the hallway with the pistol, guarding the room where Dale was locked down. They hit us hard. The outer fence buckled in minutes, shoving us back to the second line. Dead falls came down with brutal cracks, crushing bodies, but the tide didn't break. One of them smashed straight through the back door before I put a round through its skull. Another ripped in through a shattered window, clawing trenches into the floor before we dragged it back out. Lucas nearly lost an arm trying to slam the door shut behind it. The fight stretched like an eternity, though it couldn't have been more than half an hour in real time when the last corpse twit Shed its last, the yard was wreckage. Barricades splintered, wire torn open, windows blown out. We had seconds to breathe no more. Because then I saw them, shapes slipping between the trees, survivors. Not the infected, not shadows, but people. The same ones who'd been stalking us for days, waiting for the dead to bleed us dry before moving in. I spat a curse and called Lucas to the door. We were still reloading when they reached the fence, testing it like wolves, searching for weak spots. The first shot cracked and dropped a man, clawing his way up the fence near the driveway. Lucas nailed another as he tried to sprint for the back door. At least 5 of them out there, maybe more. None of them had fear in their eyes. They weren't backing off. One of them slipped through the chaos. We heard the back door slam, followed by a scream, sharp and raw from the hallway where Anna guarded Dale. I bolted, but I was too late. By the time I hit the hall, it was done. She stood there shaking, pistol still raised, the body sprawled at her feet, blood pooling under his face. Knife in his hand, less than 3 feet from where Dale had been hiding. Anna didn't speak, she didn't need to. Raised the gun from her trembling hands and set it aside. When we swept the house, the others were gone. 3 corpses lay twisted near the fence, and the rest had melted back into the treeine, their footsteps fading into the dark. We stood under the moonlight, the stink of blood and gunpowder thick in the air, and it hit me just how close we come to losing everything. The rest of the night, we worked in silence, dragging bodies, patching what we could. Anna clung to her boy on the living room floor, her eyes hollow, refusing to let him go. Lucas moved like a ghost, helping reset the traps, his face pale and drawn. By dawn, the property was patched up again, but it was a lie. We all knew it. The outer fence had folded like paper. The second line barely held, and the fight had drained too much ammo. Food was low again. Every weakness was lit up as a cage waiting to snap shut on us. As the sun bled across the torn-up yard, I faced it. We couldn't stay here, not like this. I pulled them together and told them the truth. We'd have to change, adapt. The bunker, the yard, the traps, they weren't enough anymore. We had to think bigger, move past survival, build something stronger than a single house wrapped in barbed wire. Lucas said nothing, just nodded it. Anna only held Dale tighter, her silence, a kind of agreement. And for the first time since it all began, I let myself picture a future beyond counting days and bullets. But I knew that vision came with a price. The road outside wasn't going to wait for us to be ready. Till the next time, my dear friends, remember it's only a story, and sleep well. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams.